Hi, everybody. I'm Elaine Quijano. The Democratic presidential primary field keeps getting smaller. Michael Bloomberg ended his presidential campaign Wednesday after winning just one contest on Super Tuesday, American Samoa. The former New York City mayor quickly endorsed Joe Biden after calling it quits. On Monday, Bloomberg told reporters that Biden was taking votes away from him. Bloomberg is now making the case that Biden is the best Democrat to defeat President Trump in November.
I've known Joe for a very long time. I know his decency, his honesty, his commitment to the issues that are so important to our country, including gun safety, health care, climate change, and good jobs. And I've had a chance to work with Joe on those issues over the years, especially when he was vice president. He fought for working people his whole life. And I'm glad to say I endorse Joe Biden, and I hope you will join me in working to make him the next president of the United States of America.
This is where the delegate race stands as votes continue to come in from California. You can see Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders with a big lead over the next closest candidate, Elizabeth Warren. Her campaign manager told staffers she is, quote, talking to her team to assess the path forward. The senator failed to finish higher than third in any contest from Super Tuesday, including in her home state of Massachusetts. In a news conference this afternoon, Bernie Sanders said he spoke to Warren earlier today. The Vermont senator used the opportunity to attack Joe Biden's record.
Joe is going to have to explain to the American people who are so tired of endless wars, which have cost us too many lives, destabilized many regions around the world, have cost us trillions of dollars while he was a leader in getting us involved in the war in Iraq. At a time when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to make ends meet, Joe is going to have to explain to the American people why he voted for a disastrous bankruptcy bill, which benefited the credit card companies. Joe is going to have to explain to people all over this country why he was on the floor of the Senate time and time again talking about the need not only to cut Social Security, but Medicare, Medicaid, and veterans programs.
Ed O'Keefe, Anthony Salvanto, Brittany Shepherd, Maggie Severns, and Eugene Scott join me now. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. Anthony is CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys. Brittany is a national politics reporter for Yahoo News. Maggie is a reporter covering money in politics for Politico. And Eugene is a reporter covering politics and identity for The Washington Post. Welcome to you all. We need a big panel. We have so much to talk about. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. Help us understand, first of all, what went right for Joe Biden last night and what went wrong for Bernie Sanders?
Well, let me start on the what went right. Right about 7 o'clock, when we were all looking at those early exit polls, you could see this massive number of people who decided late, who said they decided in the last 3 days leading up to Election Day. And that was an historic number. And then they went overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. So what you saw was that late breaking, those endorsements, the Pete Buttigieg dropping out, and Klobuchar dropping out, saying, vote for Joe Biden. Well, Democrats clearly listened. And then in Virginia and North Carolina, right out of the gate, you see these big wins for Joe Biden, and he went from there on sweeping the South. And that's really where it all started, to answer your question, what went right for him. You know, for Bernie Sanders, look, part of this is timing. California takes a long time to count its votes. And he is trending, he is leaning Sanders there in California. That will get him closer to Biden and the delegates as we go forward.
So, Eugene, you have also been digging into the exit poll results. Where did you see the biggest gaps between the night Sanders was hoping for and the night he got?
Well, the biggest gap, perhaps, was with young voters. The Sanders campaign has been bolstered by young voters since his defeat in 2016, and he's spoken repeatedly, especially over the past month, about the need for young voters to turn out. These are groups of Americans that he does well with and that polling has him leading with. But young voters did not show up during the primary races at the same rate as they did in 2016. They greatly underperformed. Quite a few states, the percentage of voters under 30 who showed up was less than 10% or about 10%. And older millennials went for Biden in quite a few places. And so what Sanders was hoping would happen with this generation didn't actually happen last night.
Well, Ed, we heard Sanders attack Joe Biden for his record on the Iraq War, the bankruptcy bill, and cutting public benefits. Do we know how the Biden campaign is looking to go after Sanders?
They'll make the broader argument that Sanders isn't necessarily equipped to unite the party and then defeat President Trump. You've heard the vice president over the last few weeks now make an argument. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a plutocrat. I'm a Democrat. He did it again last night at his event in Los Angeles. The argument being that he best understands the party, can bring it all together, and wants to find a way to bridge divides and make it happen. You know, he has been less prone to directly confront Sanders face-to-face or verbally. It's been done by his surrogates. It's been done in his ads. I suspect that's going to start changing now in the coming days as they realize that it's becoming more of a binary choice. One of the subjects on which I think Biden is likely to go after Bernie frequently is on gun control. The fact that back in the 90s, when he was a member of the House of Representatives, he was more sympathetic to gun manufacturers, had a more favorable rating from the National Rifle Association. Vermont is a rural state with a healthy gun culture. The politics of Vermont required that at the time. Sanders, of course, has changed since then. But Sanders will respond by doing what he's doing in an ad that's now airing in 9 states. Call out the fact that in the 90s, when he was a senator, Biden was open to tweaking entitlement programs in such a way that it might have affected the solvency of Social Security. This was a digital ad that first surfaced during the Iowa caucus contest. It's now being taken to broadcast television, a sign that it's being amplified, and it's airing in places like Florida, of course, where Social Security is critical to the lives of so many retirees.
Well, Eugene, this week we also saw Republican Senator Ron Johnson request a subpoena for a witness related to the investigation of the Ukrainian energy company where Joe Biden's son Hunter worked. What does this tell us about how Republicans want to deal with Joe Biden?
Well, what it tells us is that Republicans are very aware that there are independents and former Trump supporters who are considering walking away from the president and towards Joe Biden. What they want to do is create mistrust, present him as someone who has ethics problems and that cannot be trusted to be the leader of the country, much less the world. Someone who makes bad decisions in terms of his family based on emotion that could harm the safety of America as a whole. This is something that will likely be doubled down moving forward from the president and Trump's campaign team as things move forward in the primary contest, and especially if the case becomes that Joe Biden is going to walk away with the nomination.
All right, Eugene Scott, we know you have to go. Thank you very much. Maggie, let me turn to you. Compared to his rivals, Joe Biden had hardly campaigned in some of the states he won last night. What does that tell us about the value of earned media?
You know, it tells us that in this case, earned media was really important. The perception that Joe Biden had a lot of momentum and was really kind of the candidate walking into Super Tuesday was obviously what really propelled his campaign. He had very little organization in some of these states. You know, states like Tennessee, Joe Biden had almost nothing, where Mike Bloomberg had been advertising, had a field program. So, you know, Bloomberg, meanwhile, had obviously spent more than $500 million, and that didn't get him very far in this race because there were problems with the candidate that people eventually saw.
And Ed, how much of a help was the short time frame between South Carolina to Super Tuesday, especially considering the endorsements in between?
We have never seen a 5-day stretch quite like this.
Yeah.
We've probably seen something similar, but it's been a while since we've seen somebody come from essentially near death to basically rising from the ashes of their own bid and becoming the front runner of the party. That South Carolina win was convincing, especially signaling to people like Pete Buttigieg that they had no hope of winning over black voters. And that is what helped compel Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, and Beto O'Rourke to join Biden Monday night for that family reunion that appears to have helped seal the deal in Texas, in Klobuchar's Minnesota, maybe even in places like Massachusetts. And as Anthony talked about, that historic number of late deciders who probably saw what happened Saturday, probably saw what happened Monday, and realized it was time to come home to Joe Biden, voting for him so overwhelmingly and across the various demographics. But, you know, that whole concept or theory of late deciders who couldn't make up their mind was real. We'd seen it for the past year out on the road. Democrats grappling with the decision, not only concerned about who was potentially best to defeat the president, but who they just thought was the best Democrat of all and who was somebody that they thought deserved to earn this position and they could be comfortable with hearing from every day as president. To have them all coalesce around Biden the way they did was a signal to Democrats, look, ultimately, They think at this point, moderates do, he's the one.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. Brittany, let me turn to you. I want to ask about the younger vote, a group Bernie Sanders has been doing well with. What was their turnout like last night, and what was the effect of it?
Well, like Eugene said, Bernie Sanders' campaign expected some kind of massive high turnout, but right now we actually saw in decreasing returns about half what happened in 2016. It's something that the Sanders campaign called carpool caucusing. They were banking essentially Gen Z voters, which make up 1 out of 10 Democratic primary voters this time around, would like lobby their aunts and their friends and their grandparents when they're in the car because they have so much free time to give them earned media. However, we saw with Super Tuesday the inverse to be true, which has never happened before, that older Black aunties and grandparents were turning towards their Gen Z siblings and family members and saying, you know what, if you don't vote for Joe Biden here, we might be in trouble. And to them, their inroad with socialism is very different than Gen Z's inroad with socialism. So it was a huge dip, and I think something that will actually challenge Bernie going forward in these next contests, conservative states like Florida and Illinois, where he has to work double time to get these college students to come out and vote for him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Sanders campaign kind of tries to recalibrate and adjust for that generational kind of divide on this issue of socialism that you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just in Florida with Bloomberg yesterday, and they're even young voters, when they hear the word socialism, they associate it with like Cuban regimes and maybe not the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes that Bernie Sanders was banking on.
All right. Maggie, now that Bloomberg is throwing his support behind Joe Biden, is he able to hand him his money and staff as well?
Yes and no. You know, Bloomberg won't be running a campaign anymore, so he will have to set aside that campaign, and presumably he'll set up some kind of a super PAC that'll support Joe Biden or some other kind of outside effort. So, you know, he won't be able to talk to the Biden campaign. He won't be able to give the Biden campaign all of his money, but he will be able to run outside ads that could support the campaign, which isn't, you know, as useful as being able to hand Joe Biden $100 million like Bloomberg was able to spend on his own campaign, but it could be a lot of help to Biden's campaign, which, like we've said, has been at times really hurting for cash in this race.
Well, Brittany, I want to get your thoughts on Senator Elizabeth Warren. What kind of pressure is she now facing after last night's results?
Well, you heard from Bernie Sanders himself earlier today that they were on the phone and that Elizabeth Warren is deciding what to do with her campaign next. Essentially, it just seems like coded language that things are winding down. And there's lots of pressure on her, both externally and internally, from supporters to drop out and endorse Bernie Sanders at this critical time where it seems that Joe Biden is taking several victory laps, getting someone Beto, who seemed very progressive, to the Amy Klobuchars, to the Jim Clyburns, all on his side. And it kind of feels a little bit like a fire sale happening in Warren land. So right now she's feeling the establishment pressure. But as we know, their relationship this cycle has not been peachy keen. Obviously, she came out of the debate saying that he said that, you know, women couldn't win the presidency. Right. So right now you wonder if there's been some love lost, if she will maybe hold out an endorsement like Obama has or come in at the 11th hour for Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Anthony, let's dig into some of the numbers from 3 states that had been expected by some to go to Sanders last night: Massachusetts, Maine, and Minnesota. These states have high numbers of liberal voters. When you look at who they voted for, they were split among Sanders, Biden, and Warren. What do you make of the argument that some, including President Trump, are making that Warren's presence in the race really has hurt Sanders?
I think you saw in the exit polls this large shift toward people deciding how to decide, which is to say, did they want, when the exit poll asked them, did they want somebody they thought could beat Donald Trump, or did they want somebody who agreed with them on the issues? By 2 to 1 in some states, they picked somebody that they thought could beat Donald Trump.
That was the only issue, really.
It's part of this gaming out the November election
punditry
that we've seen voters trying to do over and over again. We know that Bernie Sanders appeals to a lot of liberal voters on a lot of issues. That much is clear in the polling. But if they shifted that calculus a little bit, then that tilts things a little bit in Joe Biden's favor, number one. And number two, I think you also see this split in the party, and we'll see it going forward, between people who say they'd rather have the party have a message of return to President Obama's policies versus people who say they want somebody more progressive than the party has ever had. And that also defines the difference between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, respectively.
So, Brittany, let's look at where the race heads from here. What does the map actually look like, and who could that benefit?
Well, in 2 weeks, we're going to see big races in important delegate-rich states like Florida and Illinois. And I think we're going to see a big split upon, right, what we were just talking about these people who want to burn down the establishment and start from the ground up, or folks who just kind of want to beat Trump and are okay with return to Obama politics. I think we're going to see nasty politics, digital ads, especially with Mike Bloomberg's money being able to be thrown into the fray, even if just on Twitter, and a lot more fracturing. I think it is a touch point in the Democratic Party, kind of where certain fractions of voters go, especially black voters who obviously were able to change the tide of the election. I know we talked a lot about Joe Biden, but it really was Jim Clyburn's endorsement that pushed so many of those last-minute undecideds. I think you're going to see a lot of miniature Jim Clyburns in the next 2 weeks as we go to these crucial races in Florida. And
Yeah,
Illinois.
when we were in South Carolina last week, I was amazed at the people who were attending these rallies who were saying the same thing, that they didn't have their minds made up in the South Carolina primary like 2 days before, and that they were really going to just kind of use their gut instinct when they got there. And some people said, also, I want to see what else happens. So
Right.
a lot of uncertainty out there. We have some clarity now. Anthony Salvanto, Brittany Shepherd, and Maggie Severns. I know it's been a long 24, 48, 72 hours, something like that. Thank you all so much.